Hello everyone, and welcome to the Valentines stream. Unfortunately, Lynx is still under the weather today, so yep, it's just me, all by myself. Well, to be fair, it's not dissimilar to how many of us are spending Valentine's Day, is it? What with all the restaurants being closed and everything like that. How are you doing? How are you doing? Dear life. Hello, Kiz! Kiz is hosting us. Hello! Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. I saw I agree in the other stream's chat. I scheduled a stream. That did not work. Reused the same setting as before, but I have tweeted it out on the Twitter, put it on the Gab. So hopefully that will get to the people who need to see it. I'm just going to share it as well on the Telegram. I knew that wouldn't work, me just scheduling a stream. So yeah, today we have tales of love. Tragic love, happy love. Yeah, I'm really good, thanks. Thank you, chat. Yeah, not too bad. Been out for a little walk. Very wintry and icy and slippy where I'm at. Good exercise though. Hi, Aussie. Hello. So yeah, we got tales of love, tragic, not tragic, slightly confusing, and we have 3 stories for you tonight. Hi, the Paradox. Yeah. I know that Valentine's Day definitely divides opinions. It definitely divides opinions. Some people are like, I love Valentine's Day. It's great. I think I've more met the type of people who just hate Valentine's Day though. Like, to be fair, it's quite commercialized with the cards and everything. But it has actually been around for quite a long time that one would send Valentine's cards, like at least from the Victorian era. At least from the Victorian era, that one would send Valentine's cards. And Lynx, as far as I know, actually has recorded a little something. She's recorded a little something, but she's going to put it up as a video. And it's by Chaucer. Chaucer wrote something on the subject of love and birds. Birds in love. Which is cool. I've not actually read Chaucer. It's a shame. It feels like they should teach you it in school or something. Got anyone on YouTube? What people on YouTube? Right, well, I think then that we should have a story. So, I'm going to start off with The Secret of Gaunt's Chapel. The Secret of Gaunt's Chapel, Anthony Nansen. King Henry VII enjoyed his stays at the manor of Acton Court, whose peaceful gardens and fields were much preferable to the noisy, smelly city of Bristol, where on occasion he had business with the merchants. Sir Robert Poyntz had reason to be hospitable, having been knighted by Henry after the Battle of Bosworth Field that had won him the crown. But the king's visit was quite an imposition. With his train of many courtiers, servants, and soldiers, in this entourage was a young courtier called John Coleman. Amidst the hustle and bustle, no one noticed how this young man caught the eye of Sir Robert's raven-haired young daughter, Mary. Discreetly, they slipped away to walk together among the tall clipped hedges. John was not yet 20, Mary a few years younger. In 2 days they'd fallen in love. In a shadowy green lane, between 2 yew hedges, they held hands, and gazed into each other's eyes, and pledged their undying love. Unfortunately, they were not as alone as they'd thought. Sir Robert had noticed his daughter's absence, and learned from a gardener that she'd headed to this secluded part of the grounds. From behind the hedge he heard their fevered words and their vigorous teenage kissing. Out he leapt, furious as the devil. "Keep away from my daughter, you villain, or you'll feel for sure the weight of the clenched fist." By clenched fist he referred to the points rebus, Poyne being a pun on the family name. From the look on Sir Robert's face, John could believe he meant the threat, more literally. "As for you, my young trollop, away with you to your room. Let's see if a diet of bread and water won't cool your blood." In tears of anguish, Mary fled to the house. Sobbing in her room, she pulled from her hair what her father hadn't seen: the gold bodkin John had slotted there as a token of his eternal love. She trusted his pledge with all her heart, that he'd find a way to come to her. All she had to do was wait. Meanwhile, Sir Robert complained to the king. "With greatest respect, sire, it is a trespass to our hospitality that one of your Majesty's young fellows should make advances to my daughter of such tender years." Cunning King Henry valued Sir Robert's friendship. He dismissed John Coleman at once from his service, and sent him packing to London. John loved Mary Poyntz with all his heart, but he hadn't a hope of marrying her, unless he first distinguished himself in some way. He had neither money nor rank. He was no warrior. He decided his best bet was to become a scholar, so thereby to become of use to the king, and to be taken back into his service. To Padua he went. He studied with all the vigour of his yearning to make himself worthy of Mary. He heard no word from her, but he trusted her, that she would be faithful to their pledge. He didn't dare write, for fear her father would intercept the letters. Skill in scholarship, the learning of languages, takes time. The years pass by quicker than you ever expect they will. John was a man past 30, when at last his friends at court secured from the new King Henry VIII his appointment to a diplomatic post in which his linguistic skills could be put to use in reaping intelligence for the crown. John's heart soared with the dream that at last seemed in reach. He risked a letter to Mary, via a friend of a friend, telling her about his appointment, declaring his undiminished love, hoping they might soon consummate their love before God. In Calais, awaiting the ship to England, he met an acquaintance of his youth, who had connections in Gloucestershire. Pretending a nonchalance he did not feel, he asked the man what news at the Poyntses of Iron Acton. Old Sir Robert soldiers on. He has a place in the Queen's household, and his children, married and breeding most of them. John fought to keep the tremor from his voice. And Mary too? Not married yet, despite her years. John half let go a sigh of relief. But a rich old gentleman from the country has lately made an offer, and she has accepted him. There was more to the story of Mary's engagement than John's informant knew. All these years she had avoided any entanglement. Her heart had been loyal to John, but when this latest offer came, she was nigh on 30, and her father, perceiving the advantage of the alliance, insisted that she accept, on pain of being shut away in a nunnery. She resisted as long as she could, till not only she was convinced that her father would carry out his threat, but a friend in whom she confided said, "Open your eyes to the truth. Your sweetheart hasn't come for you by now, has never even written, you can sure. He'll have forgotten all about you, and be married to a wench more fitting to his rank." Reluctantly, Mary yielded to her aged suitor's proposal. But then, only days before John reached Calais, John's letter arrived, delayed by its circuitous route. At once all her feelings were awoken. She remembered that day between the yew hedges, his lips on hers, his hands on her waist. She felt a churning in her loins, such as she'd never known, all the stronger because her natural instincts had been held in check so many years. She could not marry the man that she was betrothed to. Better to go to the nunnery than to marry anyone but her beloved John. It never came to that. Her father died. Her brother, Sir Anthony, who inherited his estate, wanted her to be happy, and his wife, Lady Jane, was her good friend. Mary was free to break her engagement. On tenterhooks, she waited at Acton Court for John Coleman to come. John knew none of this, only that Mary had accepted another. He never boarded the ship from Calais. His hopes and dreams were shattered. England held nothing for him, except the memory of the love he'd lost. He didn't know where to go, except away from England. Fate took him to the Rhine, where he found refuge in a monastery, in which his scholarly skills were appreciated. He could not think of finding love with any other woman. Better to devote his unspent passion to God. He became a monk and a priest. He passed his days in study and prayer. He tried not to think of Mary. The years passed, like a stream running quick beneath a bridge, and John cared not. The passing of the years of his life could only bring him closer to his destiny and God. Then one day the monastery had a visitor, an Englishman, returning from Rome. His name was John Essex, and he was abbot of St. Augustine's in Bristol. Just to hear mention of Bristol, a place so close to Acton Court, made John Coleman tremble inside. He wanted to ask after Mary Poyntz, as he'd done in Calais, long years before, but he was now a man of God. It would be peril to his soul to even speak her name. The abbot was a shrewd man, and might have divined the true import of such a question. As it was, he was impressed by John's abilities, and perceived in his conversation a longing for England, and for Gloucestershire especially. "Listen, Coleman, the mastership of the Gaunts Hospital is vacant, and falls under my jurisdiction. If you'd like the job, it's yours." The Gaunts Hospital was a priory adjacent to St. Augustine's Abbey, with a mission to feed the poor. I dare say Bristol's proximity to Acton Court was one of the reasons John accepted that invitation, but upon arriving in the city he was determined to discipline his soul, and made no attempt to contact Mary, whom he presumed to be married, and perhaps dwelling far from Iron Acton. Spiritual peril turned out to be closer than John expected. Before he died, Sir Robert Poyntz had paid for a splendid fan-vaulted chantry chapel to be added to the hospital's church. There he was buried, and there members of his family often came to pray. Moreover, as the house now had only 4 resident brothers, there was space for a few lay gentlefolk to stay as boarders, one of whom was Lady Jane, the widow of Mary's brother. One day, as John passed Jane's quarters, he saw her welcoming a guest, a woman, slender in build, dressed in black like a widow, with raven hair threaded with grey. It was just a glimpse, before the 2 women vanished behind the door, but John's heart began to thud in response to something about that black figure, something perhaps in the motion of the shoulders as they turned. He told himself it was his imagination. He made himself attend to his duties and devotions, but the very next day, in the Poyntz chapel, when he thought he'd finished the queue of penitents he'd been confessing, he saw one last figure waiting at the entrance, the woman in black. For a moment, the image of the girl he'd carried in his memory was superimposed on that of the middle-aged woman before him, her face gaunt and pale, the bloom of her youth spent. And yet she was beautiful to him, and he loved her as much as he always had. In the cover of his alcove he gave no sign that he knew her. He lowered his eyes from the alabaster curve of her cheek, and, as the blood thudded in his temple, he listened to her confession. "Father, I have sinned, if sin it be. Since my youth I have been consumed with love, for a man I met then. For years I have hoped and prayed that he would come to me, one day, as he'd pledged. Because of this love, I refused all other offers of marriage. I remained a burden on my family, and my heart and mind and body have so burned with unrequited desire that I have failed to give God the devotion that he is due. John could barely speak to say the words of absolution. He watched with dismay the frailty with which the woman rose from her knees and walked, almost tottering, from the chapel, having betrayed no sign that she knew who he was. For hours afterwards he sat there. She'd kept faith to their pledge after all. She'd never ceased to wait for him, and he perceived what toll her love-sickness had taken on her strength, as she'd not had the solace that he'd found in the monastic routine of study and prayer. What might have been? It was too unbearable to contemplate. You might say it was not too late. They could still find love in these late years. But it was the sacred bond that John had made with God. His renunciation of the flesh was absolute. In truth, though, it really was too late. Not many days later, he was summoned by Sir Nicholas Poyntz, grandson of Sir Robert, to attend a dying person at Acton Court. In great consternation, hoping against hope it might be some aged retainer who'd run life's natural course, John rode out to that manor to which he had come in the king's train all those years before. When he arrived, the steward told him in sombre tones that death had beaten him to the door. He was shown into the chamber where Mary Poyntz lay pale and still in her bed. In death the lines of her face had softened, so she looked almost as youthful as he remembered her. By her bed was a letter addressed to the master of the Gaunts Hospital. Had she known him after all when she came to confession? Dripping tears on the parchment, he opened the seal. The letter contained only a formal request. I wish to be buried in the Poyntz chapel, dressed in a white silk gown that may be found in my wardrobe, and has never been worn, and that in my hair be placed the pin enclosed with this letter. John upturned the envelope. Into his trembling hand fell the gold bodkin he'd given her when they'd pledged their undying love. He buried her as she instructed, in the chantry chapel, dressed in her wedding gown, the bodkin in her hair. Ever afterwards he made his private devotions in that chapel. He prayed for Mary's soul, and in the secrecy of his heart he prayed to her as well, as if she were his God, and begged her forgiveness for his lack of faith. Even such a private matter of the heart is not immune to the tides of history. Once he'd broken with Rome, Henry VIII was eager to seize the lands and wealth of England's monasteries. On 9th of September, 1539, John Coleman surrendered the Gaunts Hospital to the King's Commissioners, and was paid off with a pension. He would have had a kind welcome back in the monastery on the Rhine, but instead he took to a cottage in Gaunts Lane, so that he might always be near Mary. There he lived to a great age, cultivating his little garden behind the church in which the body of his beloved Mary lay. So yeah, you can see why I got that one out of the way first. That was the sad one. That was a sad story. They never got to see each other after all. And it would have been possible the whole time. No, the thing I was curious about with that story, though, love vetoed in the name of the lover's ambitions. I know that story. Yeah, not quite. I think there was just a misunderstanding there. He's gone to be a scholar to achieve the rank that he needs to get the girl, and there's just seems to have been very little communication. He doesn't seem to have communicated why he needed the information, which, you know, in real life, I think, you might well do. And it would save you maybe a bit of bother. But yeah, he thinks that she's given up on him. And he doesn't know the full circumstances of the betrothal. I think a large message of that is about jumping to conclusions, perhaps. I think so. That's what I took from it anyway. But yes, it certainly has. I'm also familiar with the concept of love being vetoed by what someone else wants out of life. Sometimes you just aren't compatible with a person in the directions that you're going. What I really thought about that, though, is that it seems to make reference to a lot of historical events. And I just wondered how much of that is actually true. Now, I couldn't find much about John Coleman, so I might actually have to look more into the chapel itself, but Sir Robert Poyntz was certainly someone who existed, and he did build the Gaunt's Chapel in Bristol, today known as St. Mark's Church, Bristol. So it's known as the Chapel of Jesus or the Poyntz Chapel, and it does indeed have his crest of arms in it. But the time periods seem to have gotten really mixed up with this story, because there was a Robert Poyntz of Iron Acton, and he was recorded as aged 17 in 1468. And he did support Henry Tudor. He did fight at the Battle of Bosworth and got knighted. But he didn't have a Mary. Robert and his wife, Margaret Woodville, had 6 sons, and their 4 daughters were called Catherine, Anne, Elizabeth, and Margaret. So there was no Mary, according to genealogical records I looked at. But it does seem that there was a Mary Poyntz. But she wasn't born to Robert Poyntz. She was born at Iron Acton, yes, but to Anthony Poyntz, his son. So she's sort of later in the Poyntses and in the history of Acton Manor. This is indeed taking place in the end of King Henry VII's reign into King Henry VIII's, and she was around at that time, yes. She was born in 1499, and Henry VII stopped ruling in 1509. But actually, what I could find for Mary Poyntz is that she married Sir Edward Georges of Wraxall and had 12 children, and passed away in Wraxall in Somerset. So maybe real-life Mary didn't actually have such a tragic life, which is a relief, really. You wouldn't wish years of unrequited love on anyone, particularly. And there's also an inkling that she might have gotten involved in spreading the message of the gospel with a woman called Mary Ward, a Catholic woman, in sort of the time of, which would have been a very dangerous time to be doing it, of course, being a Catholic in the Reformation era of Henry VIII. So yeah, she seems to have had a fairly eventful life, but there is no mention of Mr. Coleman in the history that can be found about her. Which is interesting. So I just kind of wonder how that came up, and maybe they got mixed up with Robert Pointz's other daughter. Margaret, perhaps? That could have been it. We just don't really know. It's an interesting one. I mean, these tales can borrow largely from popular cast of characters and actual happenings of events of the time. Definitely. So yeah. I think we're clashing with whack karaoke. I think we are. I'm sure everybody's singing their hearts out. I kind of wish I could join in, actually. Would be cool. I haven't done karaoke in ages. In absolute ages. But yeah. I'm gonna sneeze. Nope, I didn't. Good. Right. Well. So that was the sad one out the way. And this next one. Will it be sad? Might be, might not be, might get sad. Just gotta find out. So yeah. Wonderful Wife, Helen East. There was a lad who lived around Cripplegate way, and he was courting. At least, he hoped it might turn out that way before too long. They had talked several times, and he was sure she also felt there was something special between them. The trouble was, he was poor. He didn't have 2 shillings to rub together. And the girl, well, she deserved something more. Not that she was a toff, but she was nice. Brought up right. And he was, well, if anybody asked, he liked to say that he was on his way to learning the shoemaking trade. In fact, he was nowhere near that. He was absolutely at the bottom of the heap. He was one of the ones who helped the Leviathan. Not a very salubrious process, because they used feces for that. Any they could get, but usually the dirt that the street dogs left. He'd be sent out with a bucket to pick up what he could. So, as you could imagine, he didn't smell too good. Although he was quite particular about having a good scrub whenever he got the chance. For he was a good lad at heart. And honest as the day is long. People said he was stupid that way. Like that time, when he heard a chink, as he was running down the street, and, turning around, he found a silver sovereign on the ground. What luck! But it was just behind a gentleman who had stopped to buy a paper. And it flashed through the lad's mind that maybe he'd pulled the sovereign out by mistake, when he put his hand in his wallet to pay. So without thinking twice, he picked up the coin and said, "Sir, does this belong to you?" The gentleman was amazed. But when he checked his pocket, he was so pleased with the young fellow, you wouldn't believe. "Restored my faith in human nature," said he. "I'm delighted to meet a young man like you. Where are you from, youngster? And what is it you do?" Well, the lad started to stammer something about working for a shoemaker, but the gentleman was looking at him so intently he found himself slipping into the truth. "Well, sir," he explained, "that is to say, I help with the shoes in a way, for I'm a tanner's bucket boy. But I pretend I'm in the trade, 'cause I wish I could learn how shoes are made. And anyone can dream. Can't they?" "They can indeed," said the gentleman. "And sometimes dreams come true. I've a cousin who makes shoes. Good ones, too. I'll see if he needs an apprentice, an honest boy, like you. Meet me here this time tomorrow, and I'll let you know." And with that, and a tip of his hat, he was off and away down the street. Well, first, The lad was so excited he was walking on air. Then he couldn't believe it at all. Tomorrow the man wouldn't even be there. Of course it was only a gentleman's joke, he thought, as he waited for the next morning. But just as he was giving up hope, the man came round the corner. "I'm sorry I'm late, but it's all arranged," he called out, with a cheery wave. "As for the apprentice fees, let me pay them now, please. You're honest enough to trust. Pay me back when you start to trade." So that was the start of a whole new life. And the young lad worked like a fiend. He was determined to be the best bespoke shoemaker you could find. His fingers were nimble, and his eye was very good, and he was so eager to learn. He did everything he could. At the end of his 7 years he was an absolute master. He could do a stitch so very small he did 64 to the inch. And he sewed at such speed if there was a need for it. No one could work any faster. The old gentleman, who'd often popped by to visit his cousin, was delighted with his protégé. Once he'd finished his apprenticeship, he paid the lad's freeman fees. "Just so you can trade," he said. "I look after my investments." Now he was a shoemaker, and a freeman of London town. He had the skills to make good shoes, and the rights to sell them too. A fine future lay ahead, and there was still only one person he wanted to share it with. Whilst he was an apprentice, he had been busy most of the time, but the young girl he wanted to court had always been on his mind, and he wasn't just seeing her in his imagination. Because once he knew, he was all set for a real profession, and he'd scrubbed off the lingering stink of his old one. He'd summoned up the courage to ask her out. He'd been right about that spark. She'd said yes at once. So he and she had been walking and talking and so on ever since. Where they went depended on when he was free, as he worked all hours. If it was dark, they'd go down by the river, watching the stars gleam on the water. If it was early in the summer, their favourite place was Golden Lane. The goldsmiths would be working late on the tables outside their shops, taking advantage of the evening light. He'd admire the way they worked, the detail. She'd admire the work they'd done, the design. And they both enjoyed the sparkle. Secretly, he also took note of the kind of rings she looked at the most, promising himself he'd get her the best one day. So he started saving a bit from every job he did, putting it aside for that ring. The trouble was, although he had the skills and the rights to do good business, he didn't have the money or the place to start one. All he could do was work for other people, which was all right to get by, but no way to let him buy, especially not the ring he wanted. And the next thing was, when they were out one day, they both of them got a bit carried away. And he popped the question, and she said yes, straight away, like before. So they were to be married, and now he just had to get the best ring he could afford, which turned out to be the thinnest of gold bands. He only hoped that she would understand. Being the kind of girl she was, she did. When the day came and he slipped it on her finger, she said it was the loveliest ring she had ever seen. She meant it too. He knew that. But it made him all the more determined to give her a ring that anyone would be proud of, when he could. Fortunately, luck was on his side. So was the old gentleman. Since his cousin was getting old and not wanting to work much longer, he persuaded him to take on his apprentice as a partner. So now that lad had half a shop, and all the work he could want. Then he was earning money all right. Before long, enough to buy that ring, the sparkliest one you'd ever seen, thick gold with a diamond on it. She loved it. But you know what? She kept her little band as well. Wouldn't take it off. The next thing he had to buy was a little house. Just in time before the baby came. It was right near St. Giles without Cripplegate. which was handy for the christening, and for the next one too. Luckily the little house had a spare room, and space in the garden if they needed some more, which was fortunate because she ended up having 4. But his shoes and boots were in such high demand by then that money was no longer a real problem. Business was booming, and he paid off all his debts. As he got older he settled into being a man of wealth, although he was generous with it too, helping other youngsters as he'd been helped himself. He never complained about doing so much work. The only thing he minded was that he had to travel a lot. People all over England and Europe too wanted to hear what he had to say about handmade shoes, for now there was competition from machines. That's why he was not there when his wife fell ill. They thought she had just fainted, but they couldn't bring her round. Her breathing grew shallower. She simply slipped away. Of course, they called the doctor, and he came at once. But her heart had stopped, and there was no pulse. There was nothing he could do. When her husband returned and found she was dead, he nearly went out of his mind. He couldn't forgive himself for being away. Perhaps, if he'd been there, she might have been saved. He walked like a corpse himself with the cortege, and although it was only a step to the church, he had to be helped. Afterwards the children went to a neighbour's house, and he went home by himself. It was all so sudden, the grave was not dug, so the coffin was laid in the crypt for the night. Rest in peace she should have had then, but the sexton had noticed her diamond wedding ring. It had sparkled so before the coffin closed, and glittered in its head as he went back home. It was worth such a lot, and she didn't need it now. No one would know anyhow. So he crept back that night with a candle and the keys and a knife in case of need. He unlocked the doors and went down into the crypt and prized open the coffin lid. There she lay, arms crossed, and the candlelight caught an answering shine from the stone. What a waste it would have been to consign it to the dark. A diamond so large and hard against his palm. Her finger was cold, and although it was bent, he managed to ease the ring free. He slipped it in his purse and reached to shut the lid. Then he saw the glint of another ring too, gold and lonely, left behind. Waste not, want not. He'd have that as well. He reached out again to repeat his success. But this little ring seemed to be held fast. He could get it to the knuckle, but he couldn't get it past. He pulled and twisted. The ring wouldn't move, but he refused to give up. If the finger wouldn't straighten, it would have to be cut. So he took out the knife, and he sawed, and he sliced at the finger of the lady in the coffin, and she, lying there, felt a searing pain that cut through the cold, and cut through the coma, and cut through the numbness that had her held like a corpse. She screamed herself awake, and up in her box, her eyes wide open too. And the sexton, seeing this avenging ghost, dropped her hand and fled. No time to take the candle, nor to lock the crypt, nor to spare a second glance, and see her rising to her feet. Dazed and confused, but joyously alive, she let the candle light her up and out, and home to her husband. That thin little golden band he'd bought had brought them together again. They say in their second lease of married life, she had 4 more children before she died, and returned to be buried in St. Giles. So yeah, that was the wonderful wife. Psych, you thought it was going to be sad. You thought it was going to be sad. It wasn't sad. She came back from the dead because of love. That's not Valentine's Day suitable. I don't know what is. So, what this one got me thinking about is wedding rings. Obviously, that's a tale that establishes sort of in, I think that's in the Victorian times, really. That tale is from, and that's from London. And obviously, we had wedding rings. I'll have to see the dating on that tale, because I don't know when they were still using feces to tan leather. I know that in the Victorian times we had engagement rings, but they may have gone back a bit further than that, because the symbol of your ring, your circle, is a pretty ancient symbol of eternity, totality, perfection, unity, completeness, and of course, it represents complete cycles. So you do find the use of symbolic circular jewellery like the wedding ring, or rings of some sort, really going back a long way. And the ancient Egyptians used to have the Ouroboros rings portrayed as a serpent swallowing its tail, representing the eternal cycle of things. And that's one of the oldest symbols in the world, and its name means tail devourer in Greek. As far as we know, the Vikings exchanged rings on a sword. They put the rings on a sword. They exchanged swords, and on the hilt of the sword, simple metal rings would sit. So, Viking wedding ceremony, you exchanged rings and swords. Which would be cool. It would make modern weddings quite a lot cooler if we exchanged sword. And we both had to give each other a sword. Oh, cool. Happy ending. Yes. Indeed, yeah. I kind of wonder if I could ask a doctor about what happened in that story. Like, what medically could cause something like that. But I don't really have the capacity to understand that, maybe. Oh, if anyone wants to know about it, I might tweet about broken heart syndrome in the week. That's a thing. But yeah. In terms of these rings, the Greeks and the Romans had them. In fact, many of the Greek ones had Eros and Cupid on them. And Romans conquered Greece, and then they picked up the tradition and began using iron and copper rings. And some of them had key motifs to symbolise that the wife now had control of the household goods. But yeah, by the 2nd century CE, however, they were mostly being made of gold. And then in the 3rd and 4th centuries, you really start to get them becoming more luxurious. You have the, I'm not sure if it's pronounced feed or fede ring, but it shows 2 right hands clasped together representing friendship, partnership, marriage contract. And those were fashionable, and they were done in gold, and they could have their hand patterns carved into gemstones like onyx or garnet or amethyst. And Romans started to sort of personalise them. Now, here's maybe a reason why that lady was possibly having some, I don't know, some sort of circulation trouble, or they couldn't feel a pulse, because there is a vein in the ring finger. I mean, there's a traditional belief that there is a vein in the 4th finger of the left hand that runs directly to the heart. And that's one of the reasons why we put the wedding ring and the engagement ring on that finger. And that's called the vena amoris in Latin, which I didn't know. I didn't know there was a love vein. It's kind of maybe makes sense. I mean, love is connected with the heart. Maybe there should be a love vein. But yeah, there was medieval times. That's when you really see wedding rings being set with precious gems. Now, it wasn't always diamonds though. Rubies and sapphires you could use as well. And rubies symbolized passion, and sapphires symbolized the heavens. Diamonds were all about steadfastness. So you got several phases. You got these Roman fede motifs coming back, and that develops into eventually it develops into the Claddagh ring, which I'm sure you might be familiar with from Scotland and Ireland, with the pair of hands holding the heart. And in Elizabethan times you got rings with poetry inscribed on the inside or outside, which is quite creative. I feel like that's a tradition that should make a comeback. That was crazy. Yeah, it was a crazy story. It was indeed. But yeah. So you really got these rings, and they're becoming, more fancy. We can see the overall trend is becoming more fancy. And apparently, the first diamond engagement ring was actually in 1477. And Archduke Maximilian of Austria gave it to Mary of Burgundy. And the ring is actually said to have been made up of small flat diamonds that made an M, like her initial. Lots of suitors gave Elizabeth I diamond rings as well, but she never actually married any of them. So yeah, getting married in medieval England was like ridiculously simple. Unlike now, or at least in the UK, you have to have a marriage license and fill out all sorts of paperwork and faff. All the couple actually had to do was offer each other their present consent, and that was just expressed through the giving or an accepting of an object called the wed, and this wed was often a ring. And a wedding was thus a ceremony where a man offered a woman a ring and she accepted it. This became the norm in the 8th century, but that could sometimes create confusion about legitimacy and who was married, who wasn't. You could deny that a wedding had even taken place if you needed to. So people sort of got away with a lot under that system. So the church is like, right, enough of this. In the 12th century, you can only get married in a church. We have to know. Rings are part of the ceremony, and it becomes a rule that no man should place a ring of any type on a woman's hand unless he means to actually get married. So when you have sort of dual rings coming in, those only got really popular, like the actual giving of an engagement ring became a major thing after World War II, when American... Well, no, actually, no, it's not the engagement ring. The engagement ring, I think, became popular slightly earlier, but men wearing the rings definitely didn't happen till after World War II, because they were wearing the rings as a way to remember their wives and their sweethearts back home. And of course, we can't talk about the wedding rings without talking about De Beers. The diamond wedding ring that you absolutely, apparently, must have was basically just a result of the massive ad campaign by De Beers when people were in severe economic hardship in the 1930s. And they recruited a bunch of trendy artists like Pablo Picasso and Salvador Dali to illustrate all their ad posters. And they introduced the advertising slogan, "A diamond is forever." So yeah, they were mostly responsible for that. Certainly. So yeah, big diamond engagement ring, total scam. They're just carbon. People can make them in a lab. I don't know. But maybe get like a rarer sort of gem. One that isn't as easily crafted in a lab, or nice engraving or something. Technically, De Beers aren't forcing anyone into buying something that was never a thing. But they certainly turned engagement rings into a must. Big diamond engagement rings into a must when they never actually really were that way. So yeah. That's I didn't know much about. Yeah, we will rediscover our sacred traditions someday. Definitely. Some say marriage is a three-ring circus. First, the engagement ring. Second, the wedding ring. Third, the suffer ring. Loving the dad jokes in the YouTube chat. Do it be true though. Undecided. Yeah. Well, certainly marriages and relationships got a little bit dysfunctional these days. Yeah, the age of marriage was a little bit lower then. I mean, in the UK, the age of consent is 16. That's how it is around here. But yeah. So we have another story, and now I chose this one because it's possibly more from the perspective. Just finding the right bloody scene. It's probably more from the perspective of those who help out with other people in their romantic endeavours. The supportive friends. They are important. And goodness gracious, I have never known someone go so far in the pursuit of helping their bro get a girl than this story. This is the wooing of Olwen. It's a long one. The wooing of Olwen. Shortly after the birth of Kilhuch, the son of King Kilith, his mother died. Before her death, she charged the king that he should not take a wife again until he saw a briar with 2 blossoms upon her grave, and the king sent every morning to see if anything were growing thereon. After a great many years, the briar appeared, and he took to wife the widow of King Doged. She foretold to her stepson, Kilhuch, that it was his destiny to marry a maiden named Olwen, or none other, and he, at his father's bidding, went to the court of his cousin, King Arthur, to ask as a boon the hand of the maiden. He rode upon a grey steed, with shell-formed hoofs, having a bridle of linked gold, and a saddle also of gold. In his hand were 2 spears of silver, well tempered, headed with steel, of an edge to wound the wind, and caused the blood to flow, and swifter than the fall of the dewdrop from the blade of reed grass upon the earth when the dew of June is at its heaviest. A gold-hilted sword was on his thigh, and the blade was of gold, having inlaid upon it a cross of the hue of the lightning of heaven. 2 brindled, white-breasted greyhounds, with strong collars of rubies, sported around him, and his courser cast up 4 sods with its 4 hoofs, like 4 swallows about his head. Upon the steed was a 4-cornered cloth of purple, and an apple of gold was at each corner. Precious gold was upon the stirrups and shoes, and the blade of grass bent not beneath them. So light was the courser's tread as he went towards the gate of King Arthur's palace. Arthur received him with great ceremony, and asked him to remain at the palace. But the youth replied that he came not to consume meat and drink, but to ask a boon of the king. Then said Arthur, "Since thou wilt not remain here, chieftain, thou shalt receive the boon, whatsoever thy tongue may name, as far as the wind dries, and the rain moistens, and the sun revolves, and the sea encircles, and the earth extends, save only my ships, my mantle, my sword, my lance, my shield, my dagger, and Guinevere, my wife." So Kilhuch craved of him the hand of Olwen, the daughter of Yspathaden Pencor, and also asked the favour and aid of all Arthur's court. Then said Arthur, "O chieftain, I have never heard of the maiden of whom thou speakest, nor of her kindred, but I will gladly send messages in search of her." And the youth said, "I will willingly grant from this night to the end of the year to do so." Then Arthur sent messages to every land within his dominions to seek for the maiden. And at the end of the year Arthur's messengers returned without having gained any knowledge or information concerning Olwen more than on the first day. Then said Kilhuch, "Every one has received his boon, and yet I lack mine. I will depart, and bear away thy honour with me." Then said Kay, "Rash chieftain, dost thou reproach Arthur? Go with us, and we will not part until thou dost either confess that the maiden exists not in the world, or until we obtain her." Thereupon Kay rose up. Kay had this peculiarity that his breath lasted 9 nights and 9 days under water, and he could exist 9 nights and 9 days without sleep. A wound from Kay's sword no physician could heal. Very subtle was Kay. When it pleased him, he could render himself as tall as the highest tree in the forest. And he had another peculiarity. So great was the heat of his nature that when it rained the hardest, whatever he carried remained dry for a handbreadth above and a handbreadth below his hand. And when his companions were coldest, it was to them as fuel with which to light their fire. And Arthur called Bedwyr, who never shrank away from any enterprise upon which Kay was bound. None was equal to him in swiftness throughout the land, except Arthur and Drich el Kibtar. And although he was one-handed, the 3 warriors could not shed blood faster than he on the field of battle. Another property he had, his lance would produce a wound equal to those of 9 opposing lancers. And Arthur called to Kynthelig the guide, "Go thou upon this expedition with the chieftain, for as good a guide was he in a land which he had never seen as he was in his own." He called Gwydr Gwalstot Iarthod, because he knew all tongues. He called Gwalchmai, the son of Gwair, because he never returned home without achieving the adventure of which he went in quest. He was the best of footmen and the best of knights. He was nephew to Arthur, the son of his sister and his cousin, and Arthur called Menw, son of Tyrgweth, in order that if they went into a savage country he might cast a charm and an illusion over them, so that none might see them, whilst they could see everyone. They journeyed on till they came to a vast open plain, wherein they saw a great castle, which was the fairest in the world, but it was so far away, was it at night, it seemed no nearer, and they scarcely reached it on the third day. When they came before the castle they held a vast flock of sheep, boundless and without end. They told their errand to the herdsman, who endeavoured to dissuade them, since none had come thither on that quest and returned alive. They gave to him a gold ring, which he conveyed to his wife, telling her who the visitors were. On the approach of the latter she ran out with joy to greet them, and sought to throw her arms about their necks, but Kay, snatching a billet out of the pile, placed the log between her 2 hands, and she squeezed it, so that it became a twisted coil. "O woman," said Kay, "if thou hadst squeezed me thus, none could ever again have set their affections on me. Evil love were this." They entered the house, and after meat she told them that the maiden Olwen came there every Saturday to wash. They pledged their faith that they would not harm her, and a message was sent to her. So Olwen came, clothed in a robe of flame-coloured silk, and with a collar of ruddy gold, in which there were emeralds and rubies about her neck. More golden was her hair than the flower of the broom, and her skin was whiter than the foam of the wave, and fairer were her hands and her fingers than the blossoms of the wood anemone amidst the spray of the meadow fountain. Brighter were her glances than those of a falcon. Her bosom was more snowy than the breast of a white swan, her cheek redder than the reddest roses. Whoso beheld was filled with her love. 4 white trefoils sprang up wherever she trod, and therefore she was called Olwen. Then Kilhuch, sitting beside her on a bench, told her of his love, and she said that he would win her as his bride if he granted whatever her father asked. Accordingly they went up to the castle, and laid their request before him. "Raise up the forks beneath my 2 eyebrows which have fallen over my eyes," said Yspathaden Penkawr, "that I may see the fashion of my son-in-law." They did so, and he promised them an answer on the morrow. But as they were going forth, Yspathaden seized one of the 3 poisoned darts that lay beside him, and threw it back after them. Bedwyr caught it and flung it back, wounding Yspathaden in the knee. Then he said, "Accursed ungentle son-in-law, truly, I shall ever walk the worse for his rudeness. This poisoned iron pains me like the bite of a gadfly. Cursed be the smith who forged it, and the anvil whereon it was wrought." The knights rested in the house of Custennin, the herdsman, but the next day at dawn they returned to the castle and renewed their request. Yspathaden said it was necessary that he should consult Olwen's 4 great-grandmothers and her 4 great-grandsires. The knights again withdrew, and as they were going he took the 2nd dart and cast it after them, but men caught it and flung it back, piercing Yspathaden's breast with it, so that it came out at the small of his back. "Accursed ungentle son-in-law, truly," says he, "the hard iron pains me like the bite of a horse-leech. Cursed be the hearth whereon it was heated. Henceforth, whenever I go up a hill, I shall have scant in my breath and a pain in my chest." On the 3rd day the knights returned once more to the palace, and Yspathaden took the 3rd dart and cast it at them, but Kilhuch caught it and threw it vigorously, and wounded him through the eyeball, so that the dart came out at the back of his head. "Accursed ungentle son-in-law, truly, as long as I remain alive my eyesight will be the worse. Whenever I go against the wind my eyes will water, and peradventure my head will burn, and I shall have giddiness every new moon. Cursed be the fire in which it was forged, like the bite of a mad dog is the stroke of this poisoned iron." And they went to meat. Said Yspathaden Penkawr, "Is it thou that seekest my daughter?" "It is I," answered Kilhuch. "I must have thy pledge that thou wilt not do towards me otherwise than is just, and when I have gotten that which I shall name, my daughter thou shalt have." "I promise thee that willingly," said Kilhuch. "Name what thou wilt." "I will do so," said he. "Throughout the world there is not a comb or scissors with which I can arrange my hair on account of its rankness, except the comb and scissors that are between the 2 ears of Tuch Truith, the son of Prince Tared. He will not give them to me of his own free will, and thou wilt not be able to compel him. It will be easy for me to compass this, although thou mayest think that it will not be easy. Though thou get this, there is yet that which thou wilt not get. It will not be possible to hunt Turchtruth without Drudwyn, the whelp of Greed, son of Eri. And know that throughout the world there is not a huntsman who can hunt with this dog, except Mabon, the son of Modron. He was taken away from his mother when he was 3 nights old, and it is not known now where he is, or whether he is living or dead. It will be easy for me to compass this, although thou mayest think that it will not be easy. Though thou get this, there is yet that which thou wilt not get. Thou wilt not get Mabon, for it is not known where he is, unless thou find Eodel, his kinsman in blood, the son of Air, for it would be useless to seek for him. He is his cousin. It will be easy for me to compass this, although thou mayest think that it will not be easy. Horses shall I have, and chivalry, and my lord and kinsman Arthur will obtain for me all these things, and I shall gain thy daughter, and thou shalt lose thy life. Go forward, and thou shalt not be chargeable for food or raiment for my daughter while thou art seeking these things. And when thou hast compassed all these marvels, thou shalt have my daughter for a wife. Now when they told Arthur how they had sped, Arthur said, Which of these marvels will it be best for us to seek first? It will be best, said they, to seek Mabon, the son of Modron, and he will not be found unless we first find Eodel, the son of Air, his kinsman. Then Arthur rose up, and the warriors of the islands of Britain with him, to seek for Eodel, and they proceeded until they came before the castle of Gilvi, where Eodel was imprisoned. Gilvi stood on the summit of his castle, and said, Arthur, what requirest thou of me, since nothing remains to me in this fortress, and I have neither joy nor pleasure in it, neither wheat nor oats? Said Arthur, Not to injure thee I came hither, but to seek for the prisoner that is with thee. I will give thee my prisoner, though I had not thought to give him up to any one, and therewith shalt thou have my support and my aid. His followers then said unto Arthur, Lord, go thou home. Thou canst not proceed with thy host in quest of such small adventures as these. Then said Arthur, It were well for thee, Gwyder Gwalstart, to go on this quest, for thou knowest all languages, and art familiar with those of the birds and the beasts. Go, Eodel, likewise with my men, in search of thy cousin. And as for you, Kay and Bedwyr, I have hope of whatever adventure ye are in quest of, that ye will achieve it. Achieve ye this adventure for me. These went forward until they came to the ousel of Kilgwiri, and Gwira adjured her, for the sake of heaven, saying, Tell me if thou knowest aught of Mabon, the son of Modron, who was taken when 3 nights old from between his mother and the wall. And the ousel answered, When I first came here there was a big smith's anvil in this place, and when I was a young bird, and from that time no work has been done upon it, save the pecking of my beak every evening. And now there is not so much as the size of a nut remaining thereof. Yet the vengeance of heaven be upon me if during all that time I have ever heard of the man of whom you inquire. Nevertheless, there is still a race of animals who were formed before me, and I will be your guide to them. So they proceeded to the place where was the stag of Redinvir. Stag of Redinvir, behold, we are come to thee, an embassy from Arthur, for we have not heard of any animal older than thou. Say, knowest thou aught of Mabon? The stag said, When I first came hither, there was a plain all around me, without any trees, save one oak sapling, which grew up to be an oak with 100 branches, and that oak has since perished, so that now nothing remains of it but the withered empty stump. And from that day to this I have been here, yet I have never heard of the man of whom you inquire. Nevertheless, I will be your guide to the place where there is an animal, which was formed before I was. So they proceeded to the place where was the owl of Cwm to inquire of him concerning Mabon. And the owl said, If I knew, I would tell you. When I first came hither, the wide valley you see was a wooded glen, and the race of men came and rooted it up, and there grew a second wood, and this wood is the third. My wings, are they not withered stumps? Yet all this time, even until today, I had never heard of the man for whom you inquire. None the less I will be the guide of Arthur's embassy, until you come to the place where is the oldest animal in this world, and the one who has travelled the most, the eagle of Gwern Abwy. When they came to the eagle, Gwyrra asked it the same question, but it replied, I have been here for a great space of time, and when I first came hither there was a rock here, from the top of which I pecked at the stars every evening, and now it is not so much as a span high. From that day to this I have been here, and I have never heard of the man of whom you inquire, except once, when I went in search of food as far as Linlore, and then, when I came there, I stuck my talons into a salmon, thinking he would serve me as food for a long time. But he drew me into the deep, and I was scarcely able to escape from him. After that I went with my whole kindred to attack him, and to try to destroy him, but he sent messengers and made peace with me, and came and besought me to take 50 fish spears out of his back. Unless he knows something of him whom you seek, I cannot tell you who may. However, I may guide you to the place where he is. So they went thither, and the eagle said, Salmon of Linlore, I have come to thee with an embassy to Martha to ask thee if thou knowest aught concerning Mabon, the son of Modron, who was taken away at 3 nights old, from between his mother and a wall. The salmon answered, As much as I know I will tell thee. With every tide I go along the river upwards, until I come near to the walls of Gloucester, and there have I found such a wrong as I never found elsewhere. And to the end that ye may give credence thereto, let one of you go thither upon each of my 2 shoulders. So Kay and Gwyrra went upon his shoulders, and they proceeded until they came to the wall of the prison, and they heard a great wailing and lamenting from the dungeon. Said Gwyrra, Who is that laments in this house of stone? And the voice replied, Alas, it is Mabon, son of Modron, who is here imprisoned. They then returned, and told Arthur, who, summoning his warriors, attacked the castle, and whilst the fight was going on, Kay and Bedwyr, mounting on the shoulders of the fish, broke into the dungeon, and brought away with them Mabon, the son of Modron. Then Arthur summoned unto him all the warriors that were in the free islands of Britain, and in the free islands adjacent, and he went as far as the Isker Irvelin Island, where the boar of Truith was with his 7 young pigs, and the dogs were let loose upon him from all sides, but he wasted the 5th part of Ireland, and then set forth through the sea to Wales. Arthur and his hosts and his horses and his dogs followed hard after him, but ever and a while the boar made a stand, and many a champion of Arthur's did he slay. Throughout all Wales did Arthur follow him, and one by one the young pigs were killed. At length, when he would fain have crossed the Severn and escaped into Cornwall, Mabon son of Modron came up with him, and Arthur fell upon him together, the champions of Britain. On the one side Mabon the son of Modron spurred his steed and snatched the razor from him, whilst Kay came up with him on the other side, and took from him the scissors. But before they could obtain the comb, he had regained the ground with his feet, and from the moment that he reached the shore neither dog nor man nor horse could overtake him until he came to Cornwall. There Arthur and his hosts followed in his track until they overtook him in Cornwall. Hard had been their trouble before, but it was child's play to what they met in seeking the comb. Win it they did, and the boar Truith they hunted into the deep sea, and it was never known whither he went. Then Kilhuch set forward, and as many as wished ill, to Ysbyddaden Penkawr, and they took the marvels with them to his court. And Kor of North Britain came and shaved his beard, skin, and flesh off to the very bone, from ear to ear. Art thou shaved, man? Said Kilhuch. I am shaved, answered he. Is thy daughter mine now? She is thine, but therefore needst thou not thank me, but Arthur, who hath accomplished this for thee. By my free will thou shouldst never have had her, for with her I lose my life. Then Garreau, the son of Custennin, seized him by the hair of his head and dragged him after to the keep, and cut off his head, and placed it on a stake in the citadel. Thereafter the hosts of Arthur dispersed themselves, each man to his own country. Thus did Kilhuch, son of Kelithon, win to wife Olwen, the daughter of Ysbyddaden Penkawr. So yes, the wooing of Olwen. One of the Arthurian legends. In fact, it's probably one of the oldest ones of the Arthurian legend, because they reckon it was found in like the 11th century. It's dated to the 11th century, and it only really survives in about 2 manuscripts. The Red Book of Hergest, which is one of the compendiums of Welsh tales, and the White Book of Riderick, and it's the longest surviving of the Welsh prose tales. And it does indeed, like a lot of these very old tales, have its own Arne Thompson Uther index type. It's a 6 go through the world type of tale, which I haven't been able to find terribly many other examples of them, but they tend to involve a jealous stepmother, the hero falling in love with a stranger after hearing only her name, helpful animals, and impossible tasks. Now, this person's version, which is in Celtic Fairy Tales, by the way, selected and edited by Joseph Jacobs. This person, I feel like, gets a bit confused whether they're chasing after a prince originally or a boar. So the prince might be able to turn into a boar, but I think in most versions of this story, they just have him straight up chasing after an unambiguous boar. Yeah, that did sound like a lot of work indeed. It's a lot of trouble to go through, but to be fair, it was literally his only chance of ever getting a girlfriend. So, he was quite motivated. So yeah, the original story is really taken up by a large amount of lists. Of some 200 of the greatest men, women, dogs, horses, and swords in Arthur's kingdom recruited to aid Arthur's kinsman Culhwch in his bridal quest. And the other is a list of difficult tasks that was set upon Culhwch by Ysbyddaden. And yeah, it's just the actual unabridged version. Huge big load of lists. I was kind of intrigued by that. There was an awful lot of 9 in that when referring to Kay's abilities. Which, of course, you know, is quite significant in the Germanic. With the 9 days, 9 nights type of the thing. Very Odinic. And, you know, 3 and 3 trinities. That's also the symbolism of 9. We keep going on about 9 on this show, or more accurately, I always keep mentioning 9 on this show. But yeah, mostly I chose that one because I thought it was kind of hilarious. Just Arthur being the most impressive wingman in the history of wingmen there. I don't think anyone has possibly gone to this much trouble to get a girl since Helen of Troy. Your father-in-law setting you impossible tasks, and then you get your mates to go and talk to half the cast of a Beatrix Potter novel to find some dude who's been missing for centuries. But yeah. Incels get a hard time. They do. I think they do get a hard time. Actually, I know, unjokingly. I mean, they kind of need to pull themselves together. Somewhat. Because if you yourself take on a victim mentality in the face of hardships, then you're essentially doing what the left do. But I can see a lot of their complaints. I definitely can. Fornell's been practicing guitar whilst listening to this. I have heard some of Fornell's songs. It seems like he can definitely play the guitar real well. From what I've seen, there's like rock and synthwave stuff that Fornell does. I've heard his song Go Free. It's a freaking good song. Everybody should check that out. Oh, new follower. I'm doing well, Solo. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, it's just you don't know what to talk about sometimes. It's nice to have the chat though. Nice to see you all in the chat. Yeah, I got some. Thanks for the compliment. Yeah, just check out Fornell and check out lots of other artists on the white collective scene, like white art collective scene, like Harith and Donald Kent as well. Pretty excited for the Great Order to actually come out with more music. I can only see 2 songs on his channel at the moment. That's really cool. So yeah, let's add something to the chest. Hi, new follower. Right, what should we do? 500 in the chest. There we go. Yeah. Well, like I say, folks, I really hope that Lynx is going to be back next week. I think one doesn't necessarily want to be talking about romance on Valentine's Day whilst feeling particularly just under the weather and crap. I mean, it's a lot of people's not exactly favourite day, and I can see why. But hopefully we've managed to make it more enjoyable. 3 great stories. Thank you. Who has given the diamond? I'm trying to scroll up the chat. What is going on? Why can't I scroll up the chat? That was Sparky! Thank you for the diamond, Sparky. Thank you very much. Who got lemons? The Paradox got lemons. 1690 Sparky and Wesley Paul got the lemons. Well done. And Wesley Paul is just new. Lucky, just came in there. Got the lemons. Well, we hope to see you back, Wesley. And if you cannot catch a show, we do keep the replay here on DLive. We back up our shows to library, which I shall I'll be back. Nice. Winner, winner, lemon dinner. Plate of lemons. Yeah, if just one literal lemons, DLive is gonna send a bunch of citrus fruits to your door. You're gonna have to make a heck of a lot of lemonade. I mean, looking at the lemon count on the channel, I tell you, I've got so many lemons here. No idea what to do with all these lemons. No, I've been trying to get them out of DLive, but it's been failing to upload my ID. So, fingers crossed that happens. I'll have to try that again this week. Oh, thank you, Sparky. But yeah. So, that's it. I didn't know you were on DLive. What's the channel? I'll link it in the chat. There we go. Everyone's on D Live. Seems to have taken that as a tag in YouTube. But hopefully you all can still click on the link. And I tell you what we have as well. We also have Gab. Getting on the alternative platforms. Might get a Trovo, don't know. The Paradox just donated 1 diamond. Love is something that is kindled. Thank you very much. Hey, and 4 nulls over on D Live now. And gave 4 ice creams. Yay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, but that is it for tonight, folks. We hope. And I'm saying we because I'm sure Lynx also hopes that you've had a lovely evening. Yes, I'll just drop the Gab link in YouTube. I don't know if that's actually linked to our profile. No, it hasn't. It's just linked to Gab Home. Right. Correct link. Get on Gab. Doesn't censor you like Twitter. Hey, thank you very much for the diamond, Sparky. Thank you. Thank you really very much. We always see you here. It's lovely to have you around. But yeah, I got 21 viewers, but it's time for the end of the stream. So yeah, I think Claire de Lune de Bercy was playing over itself because I had 2 tabs open in the beginning. How about we have that to play us out? Good night, everyone. Hope you've had a good Valentine's Day, and we shall see you next Sunday. Here is Claire de Lune.